Hello, and welcome to the third in the series on partial budgeting as a decision-making tool for machinery investments. In this example, we're going to demonstrate how to estimate changes in profitability for a particular change in production practices. The proposed change will include the purchase of some additional equipment that is not currently on the farm. So let's quickly review the process for doing a partial budget. Want to start with a proposed change that you wish to evaluate. This is where research into the pluses and minuses of the proposed change might have on net income. Also, some assumptions will be formulated. If the change is made, need to look at what impact the change would have on increasing potentially net income. Will it decrease any costs that the farm currently has? Will it decrease any income that the farm might be receiving now? And will it increase any costs, changes in production practices or otherwise that the farm might have now? Once we've gone through and estimated and calculated each of these four areas, then we're going to summarize the results and then finally want to reevaluate and more closely look at, are there any non-economic and other factors that may influence how we might approach the partial budgeting process. So this is our proposed change. This farm is a mixed vegetable farm and currently uses real hose irrigation to irrigate their vegetable crops. They wish to evaluate and look and see, would it be profitable or make sense financially to switch to trickle irrigation? They do have a plastic mulch layer now, but it basically just lays the mulch. But they want to get a new one, so because the old one does not create a raised bed and it does not lay drip tape underneath the plastic. So here we are, we're starting the process of evaluating, is going to trickle irrigation versus overhead irrigation financially something worth doing for this farm business. So because this farm is growing so many different crops, it's hard to develop a partial budget for all of the crops that they grow. They chose to test drive this partial budget by using tomatoes as to evaluate the proposed change, because tomatoes are a pretty highly valuable crop for this farm business. Currently, they would estimate that they're going to have an increase in income with more timely irrigation. At least they may see a 15% increase in production of marketable yield. Currently, their marketable yield is 700 to 20-pound boxes on average in any given year, and they anticipate the new marketable yield would be 820-pound boxes. Well, they also estimate that there may be some decrease in costs too. Since they're eliminating overhead irrigation, there's going to be less weeds, especially in between the rows of plastic, so there'll be less need for cultivation or herbicide use. And since the crop, the tomatoes in this case, are staying drier when irrigating, there'll be less leaf wetting, therefore the risk of disease pressure is less, and taking that into account slightly in thinking about our decreased costs. They'll also take less time to irrigate the same area, which leads to less machinery costs. Won't need a larger tractor to pull the real hose around and to operate it. Also, less labor is needed to set up, operate, and take down and move the irrigation system from field to field. There are going to be some increased costs potentially. We'll have to purchase some additional equipment that will make trickle irrigation work. Planning to finance $6,000 to purchase this additional equipment. We'll finance it over a 3-year period. So here is an overview of the partial budget, and let's dig into each quadrant on a one-by-one basis. However, at this point, would just say that did not anticipate that there were going to be any decreases in net income, So we'll leave that quadrant out in this example. So increases in income, as we said that there was going to be a 15% increase in marketable yield based upon this year's rough average for tomatoes. They're estimating that they're going to, on average in a given year, that they might see roughly around $3,300 in increased income for the farm. There are going to be some decreases in costs. Slight savings in fungicides and herbicides, not still basically going to be following the same protocol procedures used for fungicide applications and herbicide applications, but a little bit of savings there. The big savings is going to come in irrigation operation costs. And this boils down to a savings in machinery operation costs and a savings in labor costs. And as was said before, moving, setting up, taking down the overhead irrigation on a field by field basis. There will be some increase in costs as well. Some additional equipment, as we've been talking about, will need to be purchased, such as a plastic mulch layer and also the equipment to set up the trickle irrigation system. Plan on borrowing $8,500 to purchase all of this necessary equipment, and it'll be financed over 3 years. And we're using the average interest loan payment over the 3-year period in this partial budget. Why are we not using the loan payment? Well, every loan has 2 parts to it, principal and interest. With each payment you make, the percentage of the purchased equipment you own, or the equity in it, increases. The percentage of the purchased equipment that the lender owns decreases. That change will be reflected at least once a year when you prepare your balance sheets. Interest is an expense to the business. For the sake of this example, as I mentioned, we're going to divide it over the 3-year period of the loan. The farm also has a new expense in that have never used drip tape or trickle irrigation before, so drip tape has to be purchased as well. So here we have the summary. Our estimated net increase in income is a little over $4,000. Our decrease in net income is $351. So our change in net income is right around $3,700. But let's wait a minute. Are there any other considerations that we should take into account? Are there anything that's less quantifiable? We felt pretty comfortable in estimating what the yield change would be based upon just better and timely irrigation. But what about fertilizer irrigation? This is utilization. This farm is also setting up a fertigation system so that they're able to fertilize the tomatoes or any of their crops during the growing season and have much more efficient use of the fertilizers that are applied. So will this change also add to a change in yield and grade of the tomatoes and increase even more the marketable yield that this farm might have? Well, one place to maybe try to figure that out is to go into the financial records and see if we can finesse and find out if we are selling tomatoes by different grades. Do we have that in our financial records? And or on our production records, do we know how much of grade, yield ones, culls, and so on of tomatoes are we making? So between the two, we might be able to figure that out if we can nuance and finesse this partial budget a little bit more. So some non-economic factors too: less hours to work each day, labor to move, set up, and monitor the irrigation of the vegetable crops is going to take less time. So does that mean, how is that labor going to be used differently? Is that something else and maybe it just means more time, especially if you're the labor, that you might be able to use that time for family or other uses? Are the tasks done more easily? One would think that trickle irrigation, once it's in place, is going to be a little bit easier to manage and use than it is to have to use a tractor to move a real hose system around from field to field, setting up, taking it down, and so on. So after we kind of looked at those other factors, want to come back and revisit our summary and see what changes it may have made. Maybe the change in net income may go up, it may go down, but the point being here is to think about going back and reflecting and setting the first run time around that you do the partial budget aside for a day or so, and come back, revisit it, and think about how you might change it to be able to reflect more accurately what the proposed change might have. Depending on the complexity of the decision to be made, would encourage you to use a team of advisors in the partial budgeting process. As a team, they can help you think how to prepare the budget and how to interpret the results. For preparing this presentation, here's some resources that were used, mainly crop enterprise budgets from these 3 land-grant universities. All of these resources plus others will be at the Groundworks website. So thank you for watching, and hope that you have found this useful in helping you to prepare partial budgets in the future.